I think my playstyle has changed quite a bit from when I started. Anyone remember the days of me being a BT looper? Yeah, me neither. While I think it's still true that my playstyle is still definitely opener heavy, I think there's more to that. I've been thinking about my mid game a bit recently. First of all, let's take a look at my stats graph, which is generated by Communism's Sheetbot, which is available in a lot of Tetrio-centric servers. Here are my stats from literally the other day, but let's compare this to what it looked like at the end of September last year. Clearly there's been quite a change in my defensive game, as my cheese and defense scores are a lot higher than they used to be. Here's another chart that tries to match my playstyle into 4 different categories, which is opener heavy, stride, infinite downstack, and plonk. Opposing playstyles are put on opposite sides of a graph, so generally if your playstyle is weighted heavily to one side, then it'll be weighted more lightly on the other side. I think another thing that's interesting to look at are the people with the closest stats to me. The first 3 are really not that significant. Here are the people who have the closest APM, PPS, and versus score to me. Where it starts to get interesting are the rest of the stats, which are determined by different formulae in terms of the variables APM, PPS, and versus score. Here are the players who are closest to me. APP is a metric of attack efficiency standing for attack per piece. I think the similarity in our stats isn't too surprising. Maxi appears to start many rounds with a DPC loop of some sort and then convert into a reasonably efficient mid-game, which is similar to me. Therefore, this result is kind of expected and shouldn't really be a surprise to anyone. Downstack per piece is a metric of, well, downstack efficiency. You guys only get to see a small sample of their gameplay for the sake of this video, but overall, the amount that this player downstacks and the efficiency that they do this appears to be reasonably similar to mine. When you combine attack per piece and downstack per piece, you end up with a more balanced idea of how efficient a player is with their piece use. I do happen to know this player a little bit. Their attack efficiency is a little bit less than mine, but also their downstack efficiency is a little bit more than mine. So when everything adds up, our stats are about the same. Downstack per second is distinct from downstack per piece. This measures the rate at the downstacking of a player happens, regardless of efficiency. Observing this player, they get through their garbage lines at a similar rate to me, albeit probably a little more efficiently than I do. Versus over APM becomes a metric of how much you downstack relative to your attack output. This player has a relatively low versus over APM, as most of their attack seems to be fueled by LST and not by downstacking through garbage. A similar thing is true for me. Most super APM heavy players will have a VS over APM that's around 2 or even lower. Cheese index measures the cleanliness of someone's sends. Someone who sends exclusively clean garbage can attain a negative cheese index. Generally, the longer the rounds that a player plays, the higher cheese index that player will have. Typically, opener mains have a very low or negative cheese index, whereas infinite downstackers typically have a very high cheese index. Garbage efficiency refers to how a player would utilize opponent's garbage to create their own attacks. This is distinct from the metrics of attack efficiency and downstack efficiency. This is kind of a metric of both, similar to the nature of APP plus downstack per piece. A weighted APP attempts to look at the large picture of someone's attack efficiency. If someone wins a set with openers for 7 rounds but loses the other 6 rounds to long stretches of inefficient mid-game, the weighted APP of a player would suggest that overall they're really not that efficient. The player on screen has a fairly strong opener with pretty neutral looking mid-game, which lines up with my playstyle, and thus the weighted APP can be expected to be similar. The last metric is called area, which attempts to balance out every statistic, taking into account every sort of efficiency, playstyle, and looking at the player's raw attack output and speed. I don't particularly think my playstyle is that similar to this player's. Area is not exactly an accurate measure for comparing playstyles. Let's take a look at my opener repertoire and then take a look at what's changed in my mid-game. My opener choices aren't really that difficult to follow. SDPC, or variations of that, Satsuki stacking, PCO, and a couple of TKI variants. I'm also trialing out something that I might showcase in another video soon, and yeah, keep an eye out for that one. Usually I'll have a fallback plan if the opener doesn't work as intended. For example, SDPC can convert into SDPC spin midway if I receive garbage, and PCO, when it doesn't have solve, I can just make it into a 5-4 stack. That's not that interesting though. You can watch my opener main video if you want, but really, the opener's not that important. There, I said it. I actually tend to be pretty defensive in the mid-game. I remember after a set against Poke Dialga a couple months ago, they remarked that my mid-game seems pretty safe. What you guys don't see on my channel are rounds that go like this. You should get the idea. The mid-game is not that interesting for me, most of the time anyway. I started to pick up some playstyle aspects from a few top players. If I had to compare, I feel like my playstyle is like a slightly watered down version of Kaboozled Pies. My playstyle sometimes does have that same volatility. I don't exactly pressure very much, though if I get into a situation where I can spam back-to-backs, such as a nice 2-7 or 6-3, I will do that, but I focus more on bursting for a spike. My mid-game is really more like 2.7 PPS, but I can burst out more than 4 once I spot an opportunity. This is true for downstacks and back-to-back based spikes, and even finding mid-game PCs, which is a kind of a skill exclusive to only a few people. I do like going for fancy T-spin setups here and there, but I do realize that they're usually not necessary. I received a comment a couple days ago asking why CZ doesn't go for special setups, and the main reason is that they lack flexibility and they're too risky. The reason I go for them is, well, they're fun to do. Obviously when I'm playing in ranked, generally I want to win and play a little bit more safe, but if I play in friendly custom room matches, I try out these fancy setups that I don't usually get to use. Another thing that I think is underutilized and most people can't do very well is mid-game center 4 wide or side 4 wide. Center 4 wide is obviously not exclusive to just the opener, and it's applicable for most clean board states, but what matters is the timing that you stack up for it. If there's a whole lot of nothing going on, that's usually a pretty good cue for me to start building up a large combo and tanking as much clean garbage as safely as I can. Generally I'll only do this if I notice that I already kind of have a well in the center for a multiplier of some sort. Also, mid-game or even opener center 4 wide seems to have an odd effect with screen watchers because I feel like most people don't really know how to react to one even in mid to high X, so they start to panic and make worse decisions and misdrop everywhere. So even though my playstyle is definitely open heavy, and I think it always kind of will be, I've been balancing out other aspects of my gameplay, and hopefully this gives you guys some insight into your own playstyles and improvement. Thanks for watching.